Hey guys, this is just a quick review of how to do these problems with quadratics. This is an important review. It reviews a lot of skills, and I think many of you can do really good with this if you just listen to a few reminders that I'm going to give you now. So when we're graphing quadratics, these are all the important pieces. We have the factors, we have the vertex, we have the intercepts that are important. We need to know how to make a table. And of course, we need to learn how to make sure we can graph it. And if we can do all of those pieces, then we can be more successful on our test on Friday. So it starts with let's factor. Okay, so we're going to rewrite this as a product. These are reminders. We're going to write it with parentheses. So we're going to factor x squared plus 4x plus 3. And of course, we're going to use our generic rectangle and our diamond problem to do that. So I'm not going to go too slowly during this part because I think many of you are really good at factoring. So remember, we start with our x squared in one corner and our 3 in the other. And our 4x is the sum inside of our diamond problem. The product in our diamond problem is always the product in the boxes, so it'll be 3x squared. So I have to find two numbers that multiply to 3x squared and add to 4x. Well, the two numbers are going to be 1x and 3x. Because, well, it's the only way to get 3x squared. Positive 3 when we multiply. So of course those go in my box. Doesn't matter which one goes where, you'll get the same result. And then we fill in the outside. So remember, it's all about product, so what times what gives me x squared? X times x gives me x squared. And then in the bottom right corner, x times 1 will give me 1x. And of course, I can always copy things across to make sure I see that. I can copy the 1 up and the x up. And then I see this next corner has to be 3 because 3 times x makes 3x, and so does the one on the right. My factors, written here, are going to be written based on the dimensions of the rectangle. So it's x plus 1 is one factor, and x plus 3 is the other factor because it's the other side of the rectangle. So now I have the factors written, and why are those so important? Hopefully you remember they help you find some intercepts real fast. So let's review how to find intercepts. X and y intercepts, don't forget it always relates to 0. X intercepts always have y equal to 0. Y intercepts always have x equal to 0. We're looking for the y value when x is 0, and vice versa for x intercepts. So for y intercepts and x intercepts, we plug in 0 where we're supposed to. So I'm going to erase all this factoring work. Hopefully you got that down. Now we're going to plug in 0 for the x-intercept. We're going to plug in 0 for y. I'm going to use my factored equation, and I'm plugging 0 in for y, and everything else copies. Now I have to solve this equation. So I have to figure out when this is 0. So I'm looking, remember, this is now 0 product property. When is this 0? When are these factors 0? Because if the product of them, when I multiply them, is 0, one of them has to be 0. The first one is 0 when x is negative 1. When x is negative 1, that whole thing is 0. Again, I look for the other product, the other factor, if that's 0 when x is negative 3. So my two factors give me my two x-intercepts. One is at negative 1, and one is at negative 3, 0. So that's great. That's my x and y intercepts. But now how does that help me? How do I do a similar idea for y intercepts? Now y intercepts are when my x value is 0. So now I'm going to plug in 0 for x. And again, I can plug it into this equation, this factored equation, and I'm trying to find y when x is 0. And I simply multiply this out and solve it. So y is, well, 1, 3, and they're in parentheses. Hopefully you remember that means to multiply, and 1 times 3 is 3. So my y-intercept is 0, 3. Now, one thing I want to remind you of, if you plug it into the original equation, you'll get the same answers. And this one's super nice to plug x into the original because you'll get y equals 0 squared 4 times 0 plus 3. In fact, hopefully you just can see your answer of 3 because these two pieces will both become 0. So that's another quick way to find your y-intercept using your original equation, not the factored one. Obviously the factored one worked as well because we got the same exact answer. So let's start with the sketch and then we'll review the other two pieces. So we're going to put these 3 points on our graph now because they're ready to be graphed. Let's add them to our graph. So we have -1, 0, -3, 0, and 0, 3. Hopefully you're starting to see the U shape and remember other things like the vertex, or maybe you're thinking of ways to finish this table. So if we want to finish the table, we definitely should plug in this point and maybe this point and maybe this point. The points that are at x equals negative, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, -4, sorry, not -5, -4, -3, -2, -1, 0. And we can always make it bigger and plug in 1 as well. We already have these 3 points, so we already have -1 is 0, -3 is 0, and 0 is 3. But what if we wanted to find the other points? Well, let's plug them in now to find those other points. And I chose those points because they just made sense. They're near my other ones. So I'm going to plug in -4, and I usually recommend going back to the very original equation. Typically, it'll just be quicker to do in your head or in your calculator. So we're going to plug in -4 into my rule, and I'm going to calculate carefully. We're going to end up getting 16 plus -16 plus 3. So you'll end up getting 3 for -4. And of course, you can just punch that in your calculator if you're not so great at multiplying and squaring things. So I get -4, 3. Graph that point. I start to see my U shape. Let's try -2. So we're going to do the same exact thing, but instead of plugging in -4, we're going to plug in -2. So where the -4s are, we're going to change that to -2. Calculating this out, we're going to get 4 plus -8 plus 3. And we'll end up getting -1 when I add those 3 things together. Because 4 and -8 make -4, plus 3 is -1. So at 3, it's -1. So let's graph that last, I'm sorry, at -2, it's -1. Hopefully you're seeing your U shape take place. You already can see the balance, you see the axis of symmetry. We talked a lot about that back in last trimester, and we have this great U shape we could graph. We actually don't need any more points. It's fine to leave it just as it is. Do you see where your vertex is? It's at -2, -1. That last point that we just graphed right here is the vertex. The vertex is always the turnaround point of your graph. One other reminder is the vertex is the middle, so it's always going to be in the middle of those 2 points. So that was a review of how to graph and how to use all the components of a quadratic. I want you to look at one more thing just to help you feel more comfortable with the rest of your problems. I would recommend that you always take the information and focus on maybe the graph for this one. So start with the graph, and maybe you'll see things like your x and y intercepts. Don't be afraid to make your table bigger, okay? And then writing the rule is definitely going to be the hardest part, okay? But remember, the rule always looks like this. Y equals a times times. And so these factors, x plus something or x minus something, will always be associated with the zeros of the function. So once you grab the graph, think about how to figure those points out. But if you do everything else, you should be able to do the vertex, the x-intercepts, the y-intercepts for this problem. So I'll highlight the parts that you should be able to get just by making a nice graph and trying to look at the equation. Those 3 pieces should be easy, as well as the sketch of the graph. The next question, again, they tell you this, so start with the graph. They already told you some parts of the table. So see if you can't add another part to your sketch. Or this one is going to be tricky, but you have to go straight to the equation. Otherwise, you won't be able to find the rest of the pieces. And the factors, of course, are completely related to the equation. The factors, remember, are something times something, those 2 parts of the equation that you need to find. The final question, I would recommend, again, starting with your table and how it's related to your graph. So you should be able to see some key points on your graph that will allow you to add them to your table. And of course, then your x and y intercepts become much easier because hopefully you can see them. So those 3 pieces should be very doable. Again, the hardest parts are going to be the equation and the factors, but the vertex you should be able to find afterwards just by looking at the graph. So do your best on these. Ask some questions of your neighbors. Some of your neighbors are really good at this stuff. So ask questions, get the help that you need, but use your time wisely. If you get done early, work on homework. Thanks for watching, guys. Good luck, and I'll be here tomorrow.